Welcome back to channel, the ultimate destination for incredible stories from history. Today, we dive into some of the most epic revenge stories in medieval history, tales of betrayal, cunning, and payback that changed the course of kingdoms. Before we get started, make sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating historical stories delivered every week. Now, let's journey back in time and witness history's most unforgettable acts of vengeance. History is filled with moments that reveal the raw and often brutal nature of human emotion, and among these, revenge stands as one of the most compelling forces. From the earliest ages, when tribes clashed over territory and honor, to the grand castles and battlefields of medieval Europe, revenge was never just an impulsive reaction. It was an art, a strategy, a driving force that shaped kingdoms, dynasties, and individual lives. In the medieval world, revenge was more than just settling personal scores. It was an integral part of the social fabric, interwoven with notions of honor, loyalty, power, and survival. The medieval mindset placed immense value on reputation, family honor, and social standing, and to lose face or be wronged without redress was often considered worse than death itself. Unlike in modern society, where legal systems and institutions can offer some measure of justice, the medieval period often left those who were betrayed or humiliated with no recourse but their own cunning, courage, and willingness to exact vengeance. Revenge, therefore, was not just personal. It was political, social, and sometimes even divine in its perceived justification. Consider the landscape of medieval Europe, a continent fragmented into countless kingdoms, duchies, and principalities, each ruled by lords who wielded absolute power over their lands and subjects. Allegiances were fragile, and betrayal was never far away. Knights swore oaths of loyalty to their lords, yet these oaths could be broken for power, greed, or fear. Peasants labored under the whims of their rulers, sometimes betrayed by local authorities or neighboring lords, and the only recourse was often clandestine rebellion, subtle sabotage, or acts of personal vengeance. Within this world, the concept of honor was inseparable from life itself. To be insulted, robbed, or dishonored demanded a response, one that could range from a quiet, patient plotting to an explosive act of violence that would resonate across the land. Medieval revenge stories are particularly compelling because they often combine strategy, timing, and brutality in ways that modern audiences might find both shocking and fascinating. Unlike a fleeting moment of anger or resentment, revenge in the medieval era was carefully calculated. The wronged individual or group would bide their time, observe their enemy, and strike when the consequences would be maximal, ensuring that the act was not only satisfying personally, but also publicly recognized. This pursuit of vengeance was often fueled by a combination of personal grief and societal pressure. A wronged noble, for example, might be expected to avenge his family's honor to maintain respect among peers and vassals. A dishonored knight might have to seek revenge to uphold his own reputation and prove his worthiness in the eyes of the code of chivalry. Even kings and queens were not immune. They were expected to protect their dynasties and assert dominance, and acts of betrayal or rebellion within their courts demanded swift and sometimes merciless retaliation. Revenge, therefore, was a language of power and a tool of survival. It was both feared and admired, condemned and celebrated, depending on the perspective of those who witnessed it. Medieval chronicles and literature are filled with tales that glorify these acts, emphasizing cunning, bravery, and the righteous pursuit of justice. These stories often served as moral lessons, cautionary tales, or even entertainment, ensuring that the deeds of the vengeful were remembered for generations. In many ways, the medieval obsession with revenge can be traced back to the influence of the warrior culture that dominated Europe for centuries. From the Norse sagas of Iceland and Scandinavia to the epic poetry of Anglo-Saxon England and the chivalric romances of France, the concept of retribution was a recurring theme. In these stories, revenge was rarely impulsive. It was deliberate, intelligent, and often imbued with a sense of inevitability. A slight could fester for years before the wronged party acted, and when they did, the consequences could be catastrophic. The idea of calculated revenge gave rise to some of the most legendary figures in medieval history, individuals whose names are still remembered, not just for their bravery or leadership, but for the precision and intensity with which they pursued those who wronged them. For the common people, the experience of revenge was often more immediate and visceral. Peasants, serfs, and villagers lived under constant pressure from lords, invading armies, and rival factions. Theft, violence, or injustice could devastate their lives, and with little formal justice available, they were often forced to rely on their own wits or collective action to achieve retribution. This could take the form of sabotage, ambushes, or local uprisings, and while these acts were sometimes spontaneous, they were often guided by a keen awareness of timing and opportunity. In this sense, revenge was both a survival mechanism and a moral imperative. To allow injustice to go unpunished was to invite further harm, both to oneself and to one's community. Revenge in the medieval period was also deeply entwined with religion and belief in divine justice. Medieval Europeans believed in a world in which God observed human actions and would reward the righteous while punishing the wicked. However, the line between divine judgment and personal vengeance was often blurred. A knight avenging his fallen comrade might see his actions as sanctioned by God, while a noble punishing a traitor could justify brutality as enforcing moral and social order. In some cases, acts of revenge were so extreme that they became legendary, earning the wronged individual a reputation that was both feared and revered. The combination of personal grievance, societal expectation, and religious justification created a potent mix, one that could lead to astonishing feats of strategy, courage, and, in many cases, violence. One of the most fascinating aspects of medieval revenge is its diversity in form. It was not limited to physical confrontation or battle. It could be psychological, political, or economic. A betrayed lord might use cunning diplomacy to ruin his enemies, cutting off alliances or manipulating legal systems to exact punishment. Knights might challenge rivals to duels or tournaments, using public spectacle as a means of restoring honor. Even small acts, such as sabotaging crops or property, could be considered forms of revenge, especially when carried out in a calculated manner that maximized shame and loss for the offender. This strategic diversity makes medieval revenge stories endlessly compelling because they reveal the intelligence, patience, and sometimes ruthless creativity of those who sought retribution. In exploring the most epic revenge stories of the medieval era, it becomes clear that these narratives are more than simple tales of violence. They are stories about human nature, about how pride, loyalty, and grief intersect with societal norms to produce acts that resonate across centuries. They reveal the psychology of the wronged, the cunning of those who plot retaliation, and the often brutal realities of life in a world without formalized justice. Revenge was a language in which medieval people spoke, wrote, and acted, and understanding it provides a window into the social, political, and personal dynamics of the time. From the icy highlands of Scotland to the sunlit courts of Italy, revenge shaped events, determined fates, and left an indelible mark on history. Battles were fought, lives were lost, and dynasties rose and fell, often propelled by the desire for vengeance. The stories we will explore in this series are not merely accounts of personal vendetta. They are reflections of the values, fears, and aspirations of an entire era. Each act of revenge, whether carried out by a knight, a noble, a king, or a commoner, tells us something profound about the medieval mindset. That honor was paramount, betrayal was intolerable, and justice, when absent from the courts or laws, had to be claimed with one's own hands. In the coming tales, we will see how revenge could be immediate, as when a betrayed knight strikes in the heat of a tournament, or slow and methodical, as when a wronged noble waits years for the perfect moment to exact punishment. We will witness cunning strategies, public spectacles of vengeance, and acts of such brutality that they are still remembered today. Each story will demonstrate that revenge was not simply about anger. It was about power, reputation, and survival in a world where every decision could mean life or death. As we embark on this journey into the medieval past, it is important to remember that these stories are not just about violence. They are about the human desire for justice, the lengths to which individuals will go to restore honor, and the complex interplay between personal grievance and societal expectation. In a world where law was often local, inconsistent, and heavily influenced by status and wealth, revenge was one of the few tools available to the wronged. It was a force that shaped the course of history, influencing battles, politics, and dynastic fortunes. Through these stories, we gain insight into the minds and hearts of those who lived in an era where betrayal could be fatal and revenge was an art form. We see the careful plotting, the patience, and the strategic brilliance that characterized some of the most famous acts of vengeance. We also see the raw emotion, the grief, and the anger that fueled these acts, reminding us that medieval revenge was as much about feeling as it was about action. It was both deeply personal and profoundly public, affecting not just the individuals involved, but entire communities and regions. The medieval obsession with revenge also teaches us about the moral and ethical frameworks of the time. In a society where honor was currency and betrayal was a stain on both individual and family, failing to act could be seen as weakness or complicity. Revenge was therefore a moral obligation as well as a personal desire. To ignore an insult or an injury could invite further harm and undermine one's position in the social hierarchy. This understanding adds layers to our appreciation of medieval society, highlighting the ways in which human emotions, societal norms, and political realities intersected to produce acts that were as calculated as they were passionate. As we move forward into the individual stories, we will explore the lives of knights, nobles, kings, and even commoners who were driven by the desire for revenge. We will see how personal grievances escalated into legendary battles, political intrigue, and public spectacles of punishment. We will witness acts of cunning, patience, and ruthless efficiency that reveal the medieval approach to justice and retribution. Each story is a window into a world where honor was life, betrayal was intolerable, and revenge was not just a choice, it was a necessity. In conclusion, understanding medieval revenge requires more than just knowledge of events and battles. It requires an appreciation of the mindset, culture, and values of the time. Revenge was a language, a tool, and a force that shaped history. It was deeply personal, yet inherently social. It was violent, yet often calculated. It was feared, yet admired. And as we delve into these epic stories, we begin to see the medieval world not just as a place of castles and knights, but as a stage for human emotion, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The tales we are about to explore are not only accounts of vengeance, they are reflections of the human spirit, of pride and honor, and of the lengths to which people will go to ensure that wrongs are righted, debts are paid, and justice, in whatever form it may take, is served. In the late 13th century, Scotland was a land of rugged highlands, misty valleys, and fiercely independent clans, each with its own traditions, loyalties, and ways of life. The people of Scotland had long cherished their freedom, their culture, and their identity, fiercely resisting outside control and intrusion. But the ambitious Edward I of England, later known as Edward Longshanks, sought to extend his dominion over the northern kingdom, imposing his will on a people who had never bowed easily to foreign rule. It was in this turbulent and dangerous landscape that William Wallace emerged, not as a prince or king, but as a common man whose extraordinary courage, intelligence, and unyielding desire for justice would transform him into a symbol of Scottish resistance. William Wallace was born into a time when Scotland was politically unstable. The death of King Alexander Roman III in 1286 left the kingdom without a clear heir, opening the door to rival claims and inviting the opportunism of powerful neighbors. Edward I, seeing a chance to assert control, intervened, and his influence soon became a source of resentment and humiliation for the Scottish nobility and common people alike. Wallace, who came from a minor noble family, witnessed firsthand the oppression, exploitation, and brutality that English forces inflicted upon his homeland. His personal experiences of loss, injustice, and the suffering of his countrymen ignited a fire within him, a desire not just to resist, but to strike back against those who had wronged him and his people. The seeds of revenge for Wallace were sown in both personal and collective tragedy. Stories suggest that his father and brother may have been killed by English forces, fueling a deep and personal hatred for the invaders. But his quest was not motivated solely by vengeance for family. It was intertwined with a profound sense of duty to his fellow Scots. He became a champion of a people who had been humiliated, taxed, and terrorized, taking it upon himself to restore both honor and autonomy to his nation. Wallace's story is remarkable because it shows that revenge in medieval times was often inseparable from notions of justice, morality, and leadership. His actions were not random acts of violence. They were carefully planned, strategically executed, and symbolically powerful. Wallace's first acts of rebellion, according to historical accounts and romanticized legends, were daring and audacious. He gathered a small band of loyal followers, men who shared his vision and his anger, and began striking at English forces and collaborators with lightning speed. These initial attacks were designed to demonstrate that resistance was possible, to inspire hope among the oppressed, and to signal to the English that the Scottish spirit was far from broken. Wallace and his men were not merely seeking revenge for personal slights. They were conducting a calculated campaign to undermine English authority, destabilize their control, and send a message that betrayal, oppression, and violence would not go unanswered. The turning point in Wallace's campaign came with the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, one of the most celebrated military engagements in Scottish history. Wallace, along with his fellow commander Andrew Moray, faced a far larger and better equipped English army. The English forces, confident in their superiority, marched across the narrow bridge, unaware that Wallace had studied the terrain, the timing of the tide, and the formation of their troops. With patience and cunning, Wallace and Moray waited until the majority of the enemy had crossed, then launched a devastating attack, cutting them off and annihilating them with precision. This battle was more than a military victory. It was a triumph of strategy, courage, and vindication. For Wallace, it was a moment where personal revenge, national pride, and tactical brilliance converged, leaving the English humiliated and Scotland momentarily free from their control. Wallace's vengeance extended beyond the battlefield. His campaigns targeted not only English soldiers, but also those within Scotland who had betrayed their country or collaborated with the occupiers. Nobles who pledged loyalty to Edward I were often punished, lands confiscated, and their reputations destroyed. Wallace understood that revenge was most effective when it sent a clear message: betrayal would not be tolerated, and oppression would be met with resistance. The psychological aspect of his strategy was as important as the physical. Fear, respect, and awe became tools in his arsenal, ensuring that his enemies understood the consequences of their actions. The personal element of Wallace's revenge is particularly striking. Medieval revenge was rarely a matter of immediate retribution. It was often a slow, burning fire that could take years to fully manifest. Wallace exemplified this principle. He did not act rashly. He observed, he plotted, and he waited for the opportune moment. His attacks were meticulously planned, designed to maximize both impact and symbolism. Every victory on the battlefield, every punishment inflicted on traitors, was a carefully considered statement, a declaration that those who wronged him, his family, or his nation would ultimately pay the price. This patient, deliberate approach to revenge reflects the broader medieval understanding of justice and honor, where timing and strategy were as important as force. Wallace's personal courage also inspired others to join his cause. Ordinary Scots, previously resigned to oppression, saw in him a leader who was willing to fight not only for himself but for the collective good. His ability to turn personal grievance into a broader campaign for justice demonstrates the interconnectedness of individual and communal revenge in the medieval context. When one person or family was wronged, it was often seen as a slight against the entire community or clan, necessitating a response that was both personal and public. Wallace understood this dynamic intuitively, leveraging it to rally support and strengthen the resistance movement. The brutality of the times cannot be understated. Medieval warfare was harsh, and revenge often involved acts that would be considered shocking today. Wallace's campaigns, while strategic and principled in his eyes, were also ruthlessly effective. English garrisons were attacked, supply lines disrupted, and collaborators punished with a severity designed to deter further betrayal. This was a world in which the weak had few protections and the strong exercised their power without restraint. Wallace's ability to navigate this environment, using both force and intelligence, made him a formidable adversary and a figure whose legend would endure for centuries. Wallace's eventual capture in 1305 did not diminish the impact of his revenge or his legacy. Betrayed by those who had once been trusted allies, he was seized and handed over to English authorities, subjected to a trial and execution designed to humiliate and terrorize. Yet even in death, Wallace's story continued to inspire revenge, not just in terms of personal retribution, but in the broader struggle for Scottish independence. His courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment to justice became a rallying point for future generations, a symbol that oppression could be challenged and that betrayal would not be forgotten. Psychological dimensions of Wallace's revenge are as important as the physical. Medieval revenge was often about restoring balance, reclaiming honor, and asserting identity. For Wallace, the personal and national were inseparable. His actions were driven by grief, anger, and a sense of moral duty, and he understood that the effectiveness of his revenge depended on its visibility and symbolism. The triumphs at Stirling Bridge and subsequent campaigns were not merely tactical victories. They were moral victories, demonstrations that the English could be defeated, that betrayal would not go unpunished, and that the Scottish people were not powerless in the face of tyranny. Wallace's story also illustrates the complex interplay between individual agency and broader social forces in medieval revenge. While he was a singular figure of extraordinary courage and intelligence, his ability to exact revenge depended on the support of others, the vulnerabilities of his enemies, and the larger political context. Revenge in this era was rarely an isolated act. It was embedded in networks of alliances, rivalries, and social norms. Wallace's genius lay not only in his personal bravery, in his understanding of these dynamics, allowing him to turn personal grievance into a movement that challenged an empire. In exploring the life and campaigns of William Wallace, it becomes evident that revenge in medieval Scotland was both a personal and communal endeavor. It was about restoring honor, asserting identity, and challenging oppression. Wallace's ability to transform his anger and grief into a strategic campaign demonstrates the sophistication of medieval revenge, which combined emotion, intelligence, and moral reasoning in ways that modern audiences might find remarkable. His story is a testament to the enduring power of individual courage and the profound impact that one person's desire for justice can have on history. The legacy of Wallace's revenge extends beyond his lifetime. His actions set the stage for continued Scottish resistance, influencing future leaders and shaping the narrative of national identity. The psychological and symbolic aspects of his campaigns ensured that his victories were remembered not merely as military achievements, but as acts of moral and social significance. The message was clear: betrayal, oppression, and injustice would be met with unwavering defiance, and those who wronged Scotland would face consequences that were carefully calculated, highly effective, and morally justified in the eyes of those who valued honor and freedom. Medieval revenge, as exemplified by Wallace, was about more than personal satisfaction. It was a means of asserting moral authority, challenging unjust power, and restoring social equilibrium. It required courage, intelligence, patience, and an understanding of human nature. Wallace's story teaches us that revenge in this era was not simply about anger. It was about justice, strategy, and the assertion of identity in a world where law and order were often dictated by power rather than principle. His life is a vivid illustration of how personal grievance can intersect with broader social and political forces to produce acts of extraordinary significance. Ultimately, the story of William Wallace and his campaigns against English oppression is a story of revenge in its most profound form. It is a story of a man who refused to accept humiliation, who transformed personal grief into collective action, and who understood that vengeance, when combined with strategy and courage, could alter the course of history. Wallace's life reminds us that in medieval Scotland, as in much of medieval Europe, revenge was not merely a reaction. It was a carefully considered response to injustice, a tool of survival, and a statement of moral and social principle. As we reflect on Wallace's life, we see that revenge was deeply intertwined with identity, honor, and the pursuit of justice. It was personal, strategic, and symbolic, a force that shaped both individual destinies and national history. Wallace's ability to harness his anger, grief, and sense of duty into a campaign that challenged an empire makes him a timeless example of the power and complexity of medieval revenge. His story sets the stage for the other epic tales we will explore, reminding us that in the medieval world, revenge was never simple, never petty, and never forgettable. It was a driving force that could inspire nations, terrify enemies, and leave a legacy that endures long after the swords have rusted and the banners have faded. Wallace's life demonstrates that revenge is not simply about inflicting harm on those who wronged us. It is about asserting one's values, defending one's people, and challenging injustice wherever it occurs. In the medieval context, revenge was inseparable from concepts of honor, loyalty, and morality. It required not just courage but intelligence, patience, and an understanding of both human nature and political dynamics. Wallace's campaigns against the English exemplify all of these qualities, showing how one man's determination to avenge personal and national grievances could reshape the course of history, inspire generations, and leave a mark that would be remembered for centuries. In the early 13th century, southern France was a region of vibrant culture, deep religiosity, and, like much of medieval Europe, simmering political tension. The area known as Languedoc was home to a unique society where towns flourished under the influence of local lords, where merchants traded across the Mediterranean, and where a form of religious tolerance allowed for a variety of beliefs to coexist. However, the rise of the Albigensian Crusade in the early 1200s would shatter this delicate balance. Initiated by the Catholic Church to eliminate the Cathar heresy, the Crusade quickly evolved into a brutal campaign of conquest, control, and punishment, where politics, religion, and personal ambition became inseparably intertwined. It was into this turbulent landscape that Simon de Montfort, a man of ambition, cunning, and ruthless determination, entered, a man whose name would become synonymous with both military genius and merciless vengeance. Simon de Montfort, Count of Leicester, was not a man to be underestimated. Born into a noble family in France, he was trained from a young age in the arts of war, governance, and diplomacy. But Montfort's ambitions extended far beyond his inherited titles and lands. He was a man who understood the power of reputation, the importance of alliances, and the influence of fear. He was also a man deeply wounded by betrayal. Throughout his life, Montfort encountered the shifting loyalties and treacheries that were common in medieval Europe, where allies could quickly become enemies and promises of loyalty were often broken when expedient. These experiences shaped not only his approach to warfare, but also his understanding of revenge. For Montfort, vengeance was not a simple emotional response. It was a calculated strategy, a tool to restore honor, assert dominance, and eliminate threats permanently. The Albigensian Crusade itself provided fertile ground for Montfort's ambitions. While it was framed as a holy mission to eradicate heresy, the Crusade was as much about politics as religion. Local lords who resisted the authority of the Church or who had embraced Cathar beliefs found themselves vulnerable to the combined forces of crusading armies and ambitious nobles like Montfort. It was in this context that the seeds of Montfort's most infamous act of revenge were sown, betrayed by allies who had switched loyalties, undermined by those who sought to advance their own positions, and frustrated by the slow pace of support from the Church and the French crown. Montfort realized that a decisive demonstration of power was necessary to consolidate his authority, punish traitors, and send a clear warning to those who might oppose him. The siege of Béziers in 1209 became the stage upon which Montfort's mastery of revenge and strategy would unfold. Béziers was a prosperous city, home to merchants, artisans, and a population that had largely resisted the imposition of external authority. It was also a center of Cathar belief, which Crusaders deemed heretical. Montfort, understanding both the symbolic and strategic importance of Béziers, resolved that it must fall, not just as a military objective, but as a demonstration of the consequences of betrayal and resistance. His approach was both methodical and psychological. He gathered intelligence about the city, studied its defenses, and observed the morale and loyalties of its inhabitants. He understood that to break Béziers he needed more than brute force. He needed to instill fear, assert control, and demonstrate the futility of resistance. When Montfort's forces arrived, the city's defenders initially believed that negotiation or delay might spare them from total destruction. Montfort, however, had no intention of allowing mercy or compromise to undermine his authority. According to chroniclers of the time, he allegedly declared to his troops, "Kill them all, God will know his own." This phrase, whether literal or apocryphal, captures the merciless philosophy that guided Montfort's actions. It reflects a world view in which betrayal, resistance, and perceived heresy were intolerable and demanded complete eradication. The line between divine sanction and personal ambition was blurred, allowing Montfort to justify extreme violence as both morally righteous and strategically necessary. The siege itself was a masterclass in medieval military strategy. Montfort deployed his forces in a way that maximized psychological pressure while exploiting weaknesses of the city's defenses. He cut off supply lines, launched targeted assaults, and used intimidation to break the resolve of the inhabitants. The citizens of Béziers, caught between the threat of starvation, bombardment, and the prospect of total annihilation, faced impossible choices. Those who had collaborated with Montfort's enemies were executed, their families punished, and their property confiscated. Those who resisted were subjected to brutal attacks, illustrating that Montfort's vengeance was both immediate and symbolic. The fall of Béziers sent shockwaves throughout the region, serving as a stark warning that betrayal, defiance, or even perceived heresy would be met with uncompromising force. Montfort's revenge extended beyond the immediate military objectives. It was also a psychological and political campaign designed to consolidate power and establish dominance. By punishing traitors, eliminating opposition, and demonstrating his willingness to act decisively, Montfort ensured that his name would be feared and respected throughout southern France. His actions reinforced the social and political hierarchies that underpinned medieval authority, where strength, decisiveness, and the ability to mete out punishment were essential qualities for survival and success. In this sense, Montfort's revenge was not merely personal. It was a strategic assertion of his right to lead, command, and control. The brutality of Béziers also highlights the moral complexities of medieval revenge. Modern audiences may recoil at the scale of violence, but in the context of the time, such acts were often understood as necessary, justified, and even divinely sanctioned. Montfort's decisions were guided by a combination of personal grievance, strategic calculation, and the prevailing norms of warfare and justice. In his mind, allowing rebellion or betrayal to go unpunished would have been a far greater moral and political failing than the immediate violence required to assert control. This perspective reflects the harsh realities of medieval life, where honor, loyalty, and obedience were maintained not only through law and order, but also through fear and the visible demonstration of power. Montfort's campaigns did not end with Béziers. The siege set a precedent for his conduct throughout the Albigensian Crusade. Cities that resisted were subjected to similar treatment, collaborators were punished, and his reputation as a formidable and ruthless leader spread rapidly. Each act of vengeance was carefully calculated to maximize both immediate impact and long-term influence. Montfort understood that the perception of power was as important as power itself. By making examples of cities and individuals, he created a climate in which rebellion was not only dangerous but almost unthinkable. This strategic use of revenge demonstrates the sophisticated understanding of psychology, politics, and military strategy that characterized Montfort's leadership. The story of Montfort also illustrates the deeply personal dimension of medieval revenge. While the Albigensian Crusade was framed as a religious mission, Montfort's actions were fueled in part by personal experiences of betrayal and marginalization. Allies who had turned against him, nobles who had undermined his position, and the slow response of higher authorities all contributed to a sense of grievance that demanded redress. His campaign against Béziers can be seen as an expression of both personal vengeance and a broader strategy to establish authority and legitimacy. The intertwining of personal and political motives is a hallmark of medieval revenge, reflecting the complex social and psychological dynamics of the time. Moreover, Montfort's story reveals the role of revenge as a tool for establishing social and political order. In world where law was often inconsistent and local power could be fragmented, acts of vengeance served to reinforce hierarchies, punish transgression, and demonstrate the consequences of disloyalty. By exacting revenge against those who resisted or betrayed him, Montfort was not only satisfying personal grievance, he was shaping the behavior of others, creating a predictable system of cause and effect in which defiance was met with certainty. This strategic use of revenge highlights its function as both a personal and social instrument, capable of influencing individuals and entire communities. The legacy of the siege of Béziers and Montfort's campaigns is profound. They provide a window into the mentality of medieval leaders, the moral and strategic logic of revenge, and the often brutal realities of warfare and power. Montfort's willingness to act decisively, to punish betrayal and resistance with precision, and to combine personal grievance with broader political objectives, exemplifies the complexity and sophistication of medieval revenge. It was not simply about anger or retaliation. It was about authority, legitimacy, and the restoration of order in a world where both were constantly under threat. Montfort's story also underscores the psychological dimensions of revenge. Medieval revenge was rarely spontaneous. It was calculated, deliberate, and informed by a keen understanding of human behavior. By striking decisively and publicly, Montfort communicated both his power and the consequences of disloyalty. Fear became a tool, enhancing the effectiveness of his campaigns and ensuring compliance without the need for constant force. This combination of intelligence, strategy, and psychological insight distinguishes Montfort's actions from mere brutality, revealing a sophisticated approach to vengeance that blends emotion, calculation, and morality. Furthermore, the example of Béziers illustrates the symbolic power of revenge in medieval society. Cities, families, and individuals were all part of a complex social web in which honor, loyalty, and obedience were constantly negotiated. By punishing betrayal and resistance in dramatic and memorable ways, Montfort reinforced social norms and communicated the consequences of transgression. His actions were not only about immediate gratification or military success. They were about shaping perceptions, asserting authority, and creating a lasting impression that would influence behavior long after the siege ended. In exploring Simon de Montfort and the siege of Béziers, we see revenge as a multidimensional force, combining personal grievance, strategic calculation, psychological insight, and moral reasoning. Montfort's actions reveal the intricate interplay between individual ambition, social expectation, and political necessity that characterized medieval Europe. Revenge was not a private matter. It was a public, symbolic, and highly consequential act that could shape the course of history, determine the fate of communities, and establish reputations that endured for generations. Montfort's campaigns remind us that medieval revenge was deeply intertwined with power, justice, and survival. It was personal, yet inherently social. It was brutal, yet strategic. It was feared, yet respected. His story demonstrates how one individual's desire for retribution, when combined with intelligence, ambition, and opportunity, could alter the political landscape, enforce social norms, and leave a legacy that would resonate for centuries. The siege of Béziers stands as a stark and vivid example of how revenge in the medieval era was not simply a response to wrongdoing, but a tool for asserting authority, shaping society, and securing both personal and political objectives. Ultimately, Simon de Montfort's actions during the Albigensian Crusade and the siege of Béziers illustrate that revenge in medieval Europe was far more than emotion-driven retaliation. It was an instrument of power, a strategy for maintaining order, and a method of communicating moral, social, and political consequences. Through his campaigns, Montfort demonstrated that vengeance, when executed with intelligence, patience, and ruthlessness, could achieve both personal satisfaction and lasting historical impact. His story is a testament to the sophistication, complexity, and enduring power of medieval revenge, showing us a world in which honor, betrayal, and justice were inseparable, and in which the consequences of defiance were swift, absolute, and unforgettable. The Viking Age, stretching roughly from the late 8th to the early 11th century, is often remembered for its longships, raids, and the fearsome warriors who traversed the North Atlantic. But beneath the surface of seafaring adventure and battlefield glory lay a society intensely shaped by personal honor, kinship, and the intricate codes of conduct that governed human interaction. Within this context, acts of vengeance were not mere reactions to insult or injury. They were essential mechanisms for maintaining reputation, protecting one's family, and asserting dominance in a world where the strong could survive and the weak were crushed. One of the most vivid and extreme examples of this cultural imperative is found in the life of Egil Skallagrimsson, a 10th century Icelandic chieftain, poet, and warrior whose saga is filled with acts of cunning, brutality, and relentless retribution. Egil Skallagrimsson was born into a world where honor and violence were inseparable. His family, the Skallagrims, were descendants of Viking warriors who had settled in Iceland after generations of raiding, trading, and navigating the complex social hierarchies of Norway. From a young age, Egil was steeped in the values of his society, loyalty to kin, the pursuit of personal excellence, and the uncompromising defense of one's reputation. He was also taught that grievances, whether personal slights or attacks on family honor, demanded response. In the sagas, which combine history and legend, we see Egil as a prodigy in both battle and poetry, his intellect matched only by his ferocity. These dual talents, strategic thinking, and the ability to craft biting, public verse would become his tools of revenge, enabling him to operate simultaneously on physical, psychological, and social planes. The formative experiences of Egil's youth played a crucial role in shaping his approach to vengeance. He was described as quick-tempered and formidable in combat, capable of inflicting serious harm on those who wronged him, even as a young man. Yet Egil was not impulsive. He was patient, deliberate, and highly strategic. In the Viking world, a hasty act of retaliation could lead to unnecessary risk or escalate conflict beyond control. True vengeance, by contrast, was measured, carefully planned, and executed with precision. Egil internalized this principle early, learning that the timing, method, and impact of retribution were just as important as the act itself. This understanding allowed him to cultivate a reputation that combined fear, respect, and awe, a reputation that would endure for centuries. One of the earliest incidents that highlight Egil's commitment to revenge involved a dispute over honor with another young man in his community. A challenge, insult, or perceived slight was sufficient in Viking society to provoke confrontation. And Egil responded in a way that demonstrated both his courage and his tactical intelligence. Rather than reacting rashly, he calculated his response to maximize its effect, ensuring that his opponent was humiliated and that his own reputation was enhanced. This incident illustrates a central principle of Viking revenge. It was not simply about punishment, but about asserting dominance, restoring honor, and sending a clear message to others who might contemplate a similar transgression. As Egil matured, his encounters with royalty and nobility further shaped his understanding of revenge. In the sagas, he is depicted as having frequent conflicts with King Eirik Bloodaxe of Norway, a ruler known for his volatility and ambition. The tension between Egil and Eirik was both personal and political. When the king insulted him and confiscated property, Egil recognized that a measured, strategic response was necessary. Rather than acting immediately in anger, he bided his time, observing the king's movements, alliances, and vulnerabilities. This patient approach exemplifies a key aspect of medieval and Viking revenge, the ability to combine personal grievance with strategic insight, ensuring that retribution is both effective and consequential. Egil's revenge against King Eirik and his allies was executed through multiple channels, Combining direct physical action with psychological manipulation and social pressure, on the battlefield, Egil demonstrated his martial prowess, leading attacks that targeted specific enemies, exploiting weaknesses in defenses, and instilling fear among opponents. These actions were often as symbolic as they were tactical, signaling to the wider community that those who wronged him or his kin would face consequences. Beyond direct combat, Egil also employed subtler forms of retribution. He composed scathing poems and verses that mocked his enemies, tarnished their reputations, and influenced public perception. In Viking society, where oral storytelling and poetry were central to cultural life, such public shaming was a powerful tool capable of inflicting lasting damage without drawing a sword. The multi-layered nature of Egil's revenge highlights the complexity of Viking justice. Revenge was not solely about violence. It was about restoring balance, asserting social norms, and reinforcing moral and cultural expectations. A failure to respond to insult or injury could be interpreted as weakness, inviting further challenges and undermining one's position within the social hierarchy. Conversely, a well-executed act of vengeance demonstrated strength, intelligence, and moral authority. Egil's campaigns against his enemies, both physical and poetic, illustrate this principle vividly, showing how a single individual could influence not only immediate adversaries, but also broader social dynamics through calculated acts of retribution. One of the most striking aspects of Egil's approach to revenge was his long-term perspective. Unlike impulsive retaliation, which risks escalation or failure, Egil's vengeance often took years to unfold. He would wait for the opportune moment, study his opponents, and ensure that his actions had maximal impact. This patience allowed him to orchestrate revenge that was both effective and memorable. For example, when he sought to punish an enemy who had wronged his family, he carefully planned the timing, location, and method of attack, ensuring that the act would not only satisfy personal grievance, but also reinforce his social and political standing. This ability to delay gratification and plan meticulously is a hallmark of sophisticated medieval revenge and a key reason why Egil's story has endured. Egil's personal character also played a crucial role in his reputation for vengeance. He was known for his intelligence, courage, and fierce loyalty to kin, but also for his volatility and capacity for extreme violence. This combination made him both respected and feared. In a society where personal reputation could determine survival, such qualities were invaluable. Enemies knew that crossing Egil or betraying his trust would invite consequences that were unavoidable and devastating. This psychological edge amplified the effectiveness of his revenge, creating a climate of caution and respect that extended far beyond his immediate sphere of influence. The cultural context of Viking revenge also helps explain Egil's actions. In Norse society, law and order were maintained through a combination of formal assemblies, familial networks, and personal enforcement. While formal legal structures existed, they were often limited in scope and could be circumvented by wealth, influence, or force. Consequently, individuals were expected to take responsibility for their own honor and that of their family. Acts of vengeance were not only socially accepted but morally expected in cases of serious insult, injury, or betrayal. Egil's life exemplifies this principle. His actions were guided by a sense of duty to his family, his clan, and his own reputation, as well as by strategic considerations and personal grievance. Egil's ability to combine different forms of revenge, physical, psychological, and social, reflects the sophistication of Viking culture and the centrality of honor in decision-making. He did not rely solely on brute force. He understood the power of perception, reputation, and fear. By using poetry to shame his enemies, by striking decisively in combat, and by carefully orchestrating the timing and circumstances of his vengeance, Egil ensured that his actions had lasting consequences. This multidimensional approach is one reason why his saga remains one of the most compelling examples of medieval revenge. The sagas also reveal Egil's capacity for both mercy and ruthlessness, depending on what was required to achieve justice or maintain honor. While he could be extraordinarily violent in pursuit of vengeance, he could also exercise restraint when it served strategic or moral purposes. This nuanced approach demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of human behavior, social dynamics, and the long-term consequences of action. Egil's ability to balance these factors further underscores the complexity of medieval revenge. It was rarely a simple matter of anger or passion, but a carefully considered, multi-layered response to injury or betrayal. Egil's campaigns and personal vendettas also illustrate the broader social impact of revenge in Viking society. Acts of vengeance were public spectacles, shaping perceptions of justice, power, and morality. When Egil punished an enemy, it was not only a personal act, it was a demonstration to the wider community of the consequences of betrayal or insult. This public dimension reinforced social norms, deterred potential transgressors, and enhanced the reputation of the avenger. In this sense, Egil's life demonstrates that revenge in medieval and Viking culture was simultaneously personal, social, and political, a force capable of shaping communities as well as individual fates. The psychological aspect of Egil's revenge is equally significant. His enemies lived under constant awareness that he could strike at any time, using both direct and indirect methods to achieve retribution. This persistent threat of consequence created a climate of fear and respect, amplifying the effectiveness of his actions. Unlike simple retaliation, which satisfies immediate anger, Egil's approach relied on anticipation, calculation, and long-term planning, making his vengeance both inevitable and inescapable. This understanding of human psychology is a key feature of sophisticated medieval revenge, and Egil's life provides a vivid case study of its application. Egil's life and actions also reveal the emotional dimensions of revenge. While strategy, intelligence, and cultural norms guided his decisions, his campaigns were fueled by genuine grief, anger, and a sense of moral obligation. He felt personally affronted by insults, injuries, and betrayals, and his response was driven by a desire to restore balance and assert justice. Yet he tempered emotion with calculation, ensuring that each act of vengeance was effective, strategic, and socially significant. This interplay of emotion and intellect is a defining characteristic of his story, demonstrating that medieval revenge was both deeply human and remarkably sophisticated. The enduring legacy of Egil Skallagrimsson lies in the combination of his personal courage, strategic brilliance, and mastery of multiple forms of revenge. His actions were not merely episodic. They formed a coherent pattern of behavior that reinforced his reputation, protected his family, and asserted his authority. By blending physical force, psychological intimidation, and public shaming, he created a model of vengeance that was both effective and enduring. Egil's story reminds us that medieval revenge was not impulsive or chaotic. It was calculated, multidimensional, and intimately tied to social norms, cultural values, and personal identity. Through Egil, we also see the connection between revenge and legacy. His saga was preserved in oral and written tradition, ensuring that his actions were remembered, studied, and emulated. The narrative of his vengeance served as both inspiration and caution, illustrating the consequences of insult, betrayal, and defiance. This enduring influence highlights the symbolic power of revenge in Viking culture. It was not only about immediate retribution, but about shaping collective memory, asserting moral authority, and ensuring that social norms were respected for generations. Ultimately, the life of Egil Skallagrimsson exemplifies the complexity, sophistication, and profound significance of medieval revenge. It was a force that blended personal grievance, social expectation, psychological insight, and strategic calculation. It was public and private, immediate and long-term, brutal and cerebral. Egil's mastery of these dimensions allowed him to survive, thrive, and leave a legacy that resonates across the centuries. His story provides a vivid and compelling example of how vengeance, far from being a mere emotional impulse, could serve as a tool for justice, power, and the assertion of honor in a society where reputation and loyalty were paramount. In reflecting on Egil's life, it becomes clear that medieval revenge was a complex and multidimensional phenomenon. It was deeply intertwined with notions of honor, social hierarchy, morality, and survival. Egil's calculated, relentless, and often brutal retribution illustrates that revenge was both a personal and communal act, a means of asserting authority, protecting kin, and maintaining social cohesion. Through his story, we gain insight into the values, fears, and motivations that shaped Viking society, and we see how one individual's determination to avenge wrongs could influence the lives of many, alter political dynamics, and leave a lasting mark on history. Egil Skallagrimsson's saga is more than a tale of vengeance. It is a study in human psychology, strategy, and the pursuit of justice within the framework of medieval society. It reminds us that in a world without centralized authority or consistent law enforcement, personal action was often the only means of addressing insult, injury, and betrayal. Revenge was not only justified, it was necessary, expected, and morally reinforced by the cultural values of the time. Egil's life stands as a testament to the enduring power, complexity, and significance of revenge in the medieval world, offering a lens through which we can understand both the individual and societal dimensions of this timeless human impulse. The Italian Renaissance was a period of dazzling artistic achievement, intellectual flourishing, and, beneath the surface, a labyrinthine network of political intrigue. Florence, one of the most vibrant city-states of the era, was a hub of commerce, culture, and power, where wealthy families competed not only in banking and trade, but also for influence over civic and religious institutions. Among these families, none commanded more attention, respect, and envy than the Medici. Patrons of the arts, financiers to the Pope, and rulers of Florence in all but name, the Medici had become a symbol of wealth, sophistication, and political dominance. Yet their prominence also made them targets for rivals, ambitious nobles, and those who sought to alter the balance of power through cunning, treachery, and violence. It was in this charged environment that the infamous Pazzi conspiracy would unfold, a dramatic tale of betrayal, revenge, and the deadly consequences of ambition. The Medici family, under the leadership of Lorenzo de' Medici, later known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, was both admired and feared. Lorenzo was a man of extraordinary intelligence, charisma, and political acumen. He cultivated alliances with powerful figures in Florence, across Italy, and even with the papacy, using diplomacy, patronage, and shrewd negotiation to secure his family's dominance. Yet, despite his skill, Lorenzo faced constant threats from rival families who resented the Medici's influence, coveted their wealth, or feared their growing power. Among these rivals was the Pazzi family, a prominent Florentine clan whose fortunes had been eclipsed by the Medici. Their resentment simmered for years, fueled by jealousy, ambition, and perceived slights, creating a volatile mix that would eventually erupt into one of the most notorious acts of political vengeance in Renaissance history. The Pazzi conspiracy was not a spontaneous act of rebellion. It was a carefully orchestrated plot, the product of meticulous planning, strategic calculation, and a deep-seated desire for revenge. The Pazzi, aware that the Medici's power could not be easily challenged in open political or economic arenas, decided to strike at the very heart of the family. Their goal was not only to eliminate Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano de' Medici, but also to destabilize Florence, seize control of civic institutions, and demonstrate that the Medici were not invincible. This conspiracy reveals the multifaceted nature of revenge in the medieval and Renaissance context. It was at once personal, political, and symbolic, designed to exact punishment, shift the balance of power, and send a message to rivals across the city-state. The conspirators chose the most audacious stage for their attack, the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, during the High Mass of Easter Sunday in 1478. The setting was both strategic and symbolic. By striking during a religious ceremony, the conspirators could catch the Medici brothers unarmed and surrounded by witnesses, while also demonstrating that their vengeance transcended ordinary confrontation. It was public, theatrical, and designed to shock the city to its core. The choice of location reflects the sophistication of Renaissance revenge. It was not merely an act of physical violence, but a calculated performance meant to assert dominance, humiliate enemies, and manipulate public perception. On that fateful day, the conspirators struck with precision. Giuliano de' Medici was murdered in cold blood within the cathedral, stabbed multiple times in a brutal and public display. Lorenzo, however, survived the attack, escaping with only minor injuries, thanks to his quick thinking, loyal supporters, and sheer luck. The immediate consequences were dramatic. The assassination attempt created chaos within the cathedral, sending worshippers into panic and giving the surviving Medici loyalists an opportunity to regroup. The conspirators had anticipated that death of both brothers would paralyze the Medici faction, allowing them to seize control of Florence. Yet, as often happens in the unpredictable calculus of revenge, the plan did not unfold as intended. Lorenzo's survival transformed the conspiracy into an act of personal vengeance that demanded retribution, setting the stage for a counterattack that would be as ruthless and calculated as the original plot. Lorenzo's response to the Pazzi conspiracy exemplifies the strategic and psychological dimensions of revenge. He did not act immediately in blind fury. Rather, he assessed the situation, consolidated his supporters, and prepared a series of responses designed to punish the conspirators, secure his authority, and restore the balance of power. The revenge was swift, but it was also deliberate. Those directly involved in the plot were hunted down, subjected to public trial, and executed with brutal efficiency. Prominent members of the Pazzi family were captured, tortured, and killed, their deaths serving as both punishment and a warning to others who might contemplate betrayal. The thoroughness and visibility of Lorenzo's revenge ensured that the Medici were not only avenged, but that their reputation and authority remained unchallenged. The psychological impact of Lorenzo's actions was profound. In the Renaissance world, where family honor, social standing, and political influence were deeply intertwined, the failure to respond decisively to betrayal could be interpreted as weakness, inviting further challenges. Lorenzo understood this dynamic perfectly. By exacting vengeance with precision and authority, he reinforced his own legitimacy, deterred potential rivals, and demonstrated that betrayal against the Medici would carry severe consequences. This aspect of revenge, its ability to shape perception, enforce norms, and influence behavior, was as important as the physical act of retribution itself. In Lorenzo's hands, revenge became a tool of governance, a way to maintain order, and a demonstration of the enduring power of personal and familial honor. The broader political implications of the Pazzi conspiracy and its aftermath illustrate the intersection of personal vengeance and statecraft in Renaissance Italy. Florence was not merely a city, it was a complex political ecosystem where wealthy families, guilds, religious institutions, and foreign powers all interacted in a delicate balance. Acts of revenge, particularly those as public and dramatic as the retaliation against the Pazzi, had ramifications far beyond the immediate actors. They could alter alliances, intimidate potential challengers, and shift the trajectory of governance. Lorenzo's measured yet decisive response ensured that the Medici retained their dominance, while simultaneously sending a clear signal to both domestic and foreign observers. The Medici were a force not to be trifled with, and those who opposed them would face consequences that were both immediate and enduring. The revenge exacted by Lorenzo was not limited to physical punishment. It extended into social and political spheres. He leveraged his position to remove the Pazzi from influential posts, confiscate their properties, and systematically undermine their power within Florence. This comprehensive approach demonstrates the multidimensional nature of Renaissance revenge. It was simultaneously personal, social, and political, combining direct violence with long-term strategies for consolidating authority. In doing so, Lorenzo ensured that the Medici were not only avenged, but that the structural foundations of their power remained intact, reinforcing the lesson that betrayal carries consequences across every level of society. Religious authority also played a complex role in the aftermath of the conspiracy. The assassination took place in a sacred space, creating a moral and spiritual dimension to the revenge that followed. By exacting retribution against the conspirators, Lorenzo aligned his actions with contemporary notions of justice and divine order, framing the punishment as morally justified in the eyes of both the public and the church. This moral dimension amplified the effectiveness of his revenge, ensuring that it was not perceived merely as personal vendetta, but as a righteous act that reinforced social and spiritual norms. In the Renaissance context, where the interplay of religion and politics was inseparable, this alignment was crucial to consolidating power and maintaining legitimacy. The public nature of the retribution against the Pazzi was another strategic element. By executing conspirators in visible, dramatic fashion, Lorenzo transformed revenge into a performance that communicated power and authority to the city at large. In a society where reputation, honor, and social perception were critical, this performative aspect of revenge was as important as the physical act itself. Citizens, nobles, and foreign observers witnessed the consequences of betrayal firsthand, internalizing the lesson that the Medici were both formidable and uncompromising. This psychological component of revenge, the ability to influence perception and behavior through demonstration, was central to Lorenzo's success in maintaining control. Lorenzo's handling of the conspiracy also reveals the importance of loyalty and networks. In medieval and Renaissance revenge, he relied on a network of allies, family members, and trusted supporters to protect him during the initial attack, to respond to the immediate crisis, and to enforce punishment afterward. Revenge in this context was not an individual endeavor. It was a collective process that involved coordination, strategic planning, and mobilization of resources. Lorenzo's skill in leveraging these networks ensured that the revenge was both effective and comprehensive, consolidating his authority and deterring future threats. The aftermath of the Pazzi conspiracy also demonstrates the long-term consequences of revenge. While Lorenzo's immediate retaliation restored his family's honor and eliminated key rivals, it also sent ripples through Florence's political landscape, influencing alliances, fostering loyalty among supporters, and shaping behavior of potential challengers for years to come. Revenge in this context was not merely about satisfying personal grievance. It was a strategic tool for shaping the social, political, and moral environment of the city. Lorenzo's success lay in his ability to integrate immediate retribution with long-term planning, ensuring that the consequences of betrayal were both felt and remembered. The Pazzi conspiracy and Lorenzo's revenge also illustrate the interplay between personal emotion and strategic calculation in medieval and Renaissance acts of vengeance. Lorenzo was undoubtedly motivated by grief, anger, and a sense of personal affront, but his response was not purely emotional. It was calculated, deliberate, and multidimensional, designed to achieve both personal satisfaction and broader political objectives. This combination of emotion and intellect is a hallmark of sophisticated revenge in historical contexts, demonstrating that effective vengeance requires both courage and strategic insight. Through the story of the Medici and the Pazzi conspiracy, we also see how revenge can serve as a mechanism for reinforcing cultural and social norms. The conspirators violated not only personal trust, but also societal expectations regarding loyalty, honor, and lawful behavior. Lorenzo's response reinforced these norms, demonstrating that transgression would be met with decisive and visible punishment. In this way, revenge functioned as both a personal and communal tool, shaping behavior, maintaining order, and asserting moral authority. Ultimately, the story of the Pazzi conspiracy and the Medici response highlights the enduring power, complexity, and significance of revenge in the medieval and Renaissance world. It was not merely about personal satisfaction, it was a strategic, multidimensional process that combined physical action, psychological insight, social influence, and moral authority. Lorenzo's handling of the conspiracy ensured that the Medici were avenged, that their authority remained unchallenged, and that the consequences of betrayal were vividly demonstrated to the wider community. The Medici example also reminds us that revenge in this era was inseparable from political and social structures. Personal grievance, family honor, and public reputation were deeply intertwined with the exercise of power, the maintenance of alliances, and the management of civic institutions. Acts of revenge, therefore, had far-reaching consequences, shaping not only immediate events, but also the broader trajectory of history. Lorenzo's ability to navigate these complexities, to balance emotion and strategy, and to exact comprehensive vengeance, underscores the sophistication and enduring relevance of medieval and Renaissance revenge. Through the lens of the Pazzi conspiracy, we see that revenge was as much about perception and influence as it was about punishment. By orchestrating retribution that was visible, thorough, and morally justified, Lorenzo de Medici ensured that the lessons of betrayal were internalized by both allies and rivals. The story reveals the multidimensional nature of revenge. It is personal and political, immediate and long-term, physical and psychological, brutal and calculated. The Medici response demonstrates that, in a world governed by honor, power, and perception, revenge was both a necessity and an art form, a means of asserting authority, maintaining order, and shaping history. The Viking Age, stretching from the late 8th to the early 11th century, produced countless tales of raiding, conquest, and audacious acts of vengeance. Among the most legendary figures of this era was Rollo, a Viking chieftain whose ambition, cunning, and capacity for revenge would shape the destiny of Normandy and leave an indelible mark on European history. Unlike the mercenary raiders who struck quickly and departed, Rollo was a strategist, a man who understood that vengeance could serve multiple purposes, restoring personal honor, asserting authority over rivals, and securing long-term political and territorial gains. His campaigns, particularly the famous Siege of Paris, exemplify the intricate interplay of personal grievance, tactical brilliance, and the unyielding pursuit of retribution that defined Viking revenge. Rollo was born into a turbulent world where loyalty was fragile, alliances were temporary, and violence was often the only currency of respect. Norse society prized strength, courage, and cunning, and those who failed to defend their honor or respond to insult risked humiliation, marginalization, or death. From an early age, Rollo demonstrated the qualities that would make him both feared and respected: physical prowess, intelligence, and a keen understanding of strategy. But beyond these attributes lay a deep-seated sense of grievance and ambition. Rollo had witnessed betrayals among chieftains, conflicts over land and authority, and personal slights that left him determined to assert his dominance and ensure that those who wronged him would pay a steep price. Revenge, in Rollo's world view, was inseparable from leadership. It was both a moral imperative and a practical necessity. The context of Rollo's campaigns was the volatile political landscape of northern Europe in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. The Frankish kingdoms were fragmented, weakened by internal disputes, and vulnerable to external threats. Viking raiders had been plundering coastal towns for decades, exploiting the chaos and the limited capacity of local rulers to defend their territories. Rollo emerged as a leader among these raiders, commanding loyalty through both personal charisma and demonstrated capability. His forces were disciplined, organized, and capable of executing complex maneuvers, a step beyond the random or opportunistic attacks often associated with Viking bands. This level of organization allowed Rollo to plan campaigns of revenge and conquest that were both precise and devastating, enhancing his reputation and increasing the political leverage he could wield. One of the most famous episodes in Rollo's life was the Siege of Paris, which unfolded in 885–886. Paris, a city of strategic importance on the River Seine, represented both a valuable target and a symbolic prize. The attack was not merely an opportunistic raid. It was a carefully planned campaign designed to punish perceived slights, assert Viking dominance, and extract concessions from the Frankish rulers. Rollo's approach to the siege reveals the sophisticated nature of Viking revenge. It combined tactical ingenuity, psychological manipulation, and the careful application of force to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. The siege began with a blockade of the city, cutting off supplies and restricting movement. Rollo and his forces constructed bridges, fortified camps, and established supply lines, demonstrating a level of strategic planning that went far beyond simple raiding. The intent was not only to capture the city, but to wear down its defenders, create psychological pressure, and demonstrate the futility of resistance. Every action taken by Rollo was calculated to maximize both immediate impact and long-term advantage. His reputation for cunning and ruthlessness amplified the effect. The defenders knew that their enemies were not merely opportunistic marauders, but skilled strategists capable of prolonged and devastating attacks. The personal dimension of Rollo's revenge became evident in his treatment of rival Frankish leaders and local nobles. Those who had previously slighted, betrayed, or opposed him were targeted for particular attention. Some were captured, humiliated, or forced to pay ransom. Others were subjected to displays of violence designed to reinforce Rollo's dominance and assert the consequences of defiance. In Viking culture, honor was inseparable from public perception. A leader who allowed insults, attacks, or rivalries to go unanswered risked losing credibility and authority. Rollo understood this principle intuitively, and he used the siege not only to extract wealth, but to reinforce his personal and political stature. The psychological impact of the siege was immense. The citizens of Paris, trapped within their walls, witnessed the relentless pressure exerted by Rollo's forces, the strategic placement of camps, and the construction of siege equipment. They understood that resistance came at great cost, and that their enemies were capable of patience, persistence, and brutality. This psychological dimension of revenge, instilling fear, demonstrating inevitability, and asserting dominance without immediate violence, was a hallmark of Rollo's approach. He combined the threat of destruction with calculated diplomacy, often negotiating for tribute while maintaining the implicit threat of further violence, illustrating the sophisticated interplay between intimidation and strategic reward that characterized Viking retribution. Rollo's revenge was not purely about punishment. It was also about securing future power. By targeting Paris, he demonstrated his capacity to challenge one of the most important cities in the Frankish kingdom. This action elevated his status among other Viking leaders, reinforced loyalty among his followers, and created leverage in negotiations with Frankish rulers. In other words, revenge in Rollo's hands was both an immediate and long-term instrument. It settled scores, restored honor, and positioned him advantageously for future political and territorial gains. The siege also revealed Rollo's flexibility and strategic intelligence. Unlike a rash or impulsive leader, he was capable of adjusting tactics in response to changing circumstances. When direct assault proved costly, he relied on blockade, negotiation, and psychological pressure. When opportunities arose to exploit weaknesses in the city's defenses or the morale of its inhabitants, he acted decisively. This adaptability demonstrates the multidimensional nature of Viking revenge. It was not solely about brute force, but about observation, calculation, and strategic timing. The effectiveness of such revenge depended on a combination of strength, patience, and intelligence, a combination that Rollo possessed in abundance. Rollo's ability to balance immediate action with long-term planning is also evident in the aftermath of the siege. Although the Vikings did not permanently occupy Paris, they extracted tribute and demonstrated the effectiveness of their military threat. The success of this campaign enhanced Rollo's reputation, secured resources for future endeavors, and cemented his status as a formidable force in northern Europe. Revenge in this context was inseparable from political acumen. It was about asserting authority, demonstrating capability, and ensuring that both enemies and allies recognized the consequences of opposition. The human cost of Rollo's revenge was immense. The siege placed immense strain on the inhabitants of Paris, resulting in starvation, suffering, and casualties. While modern sensibilities recoil at such brutality in the Viking world, these consequences were both expected and morally justified. The failure of local rulers to adequately defend their citizens or to honor agreements was viewed as a breach of duty, and vengeance served to restore balance, enforce social norms, and reinforce the authority of the aggressor. Rollo's actions, therefore, were not merely acts of personal retribution. They were intertwined with the broader moral and political logic of Viking society, where strength, cunning, and decisive action were essential to survival. Rollo's campaigns also exemplify the interplay between personal ambition and collective loyalty. His followers were motivated not only by promises of wealth, but by loyalty to a leader who demonstrated skill, courage, and the willingness to exact vengeance against those who wronged him. Revenge, in this sense, was a mechanism for consolidating authority. It bound followers to their leader, rewarded loyalty, and punished betrayal. The cohesion of Rollo's forces, maintained through both fear and respect, was a critical factor in his success, illustrating how personal retribution could serve broader strategic purposes. The long-term consequences of Rollo's vengeance are particularly noteworthy. His campaigns in northern France, including the Siege of Paris, ultimately led to his recognition by the Frankish king Charles the Simple and the granting of lands that would become Normandy. This act of reconciliation was itself a testament to the effectiveness of strategic revenge. By demonstrating his capability, asserting his authority, and punishing opposition, Rollo secured both immediate gains and long-term legitimacy. Revenge in this context was not an end in itself. It was a tool for shaping political outcomes, securing resources, and establishing a lasting legacy. Rollo's story also illuminates the psychological dimensions of revenge. His enemies lived under the constant awareness that he could strike with precision, persistence, and brutality. This ongoing threat influenced behavior, deterred opposition, and enhanced Rollo's reputation without requiring continuous violence. In other words, revenge in the Viking context was as much about perception and deterrence as it was about immediate retribution. Rollo's mastery of this dynamic allowed him to achieve both personal and political objectives, demonstrating the sophistication and strategic depth of Viking vengeance. The Siege of Paris and Rollo's broader campaigns also highlight the symbolic power of revenge. Every action, from the construction of siege bridges to the targeted attacks on rival leaders, communicated a message. Opposition would be met with decisive, calculated, and relentless response. In a society where honor, reputation, and perception were paramount, the symbolism of revenge could be as powerful as its physical effects. Rollo understood this principle intuitively, using it to enhance his status, intimidate rivals, and secure loyalty among followers. Rollo's eventual settlement in Normandy further illustrates the dual nature of revenge and reconciliation in Viking culture. By accepting land from the Frankish king, he transformed a history of raiding and vengeance into a legitimate political and social position. Yet this legitimacy was underpinned by his demonstrated capacity for retribution. He had earned respect, authority, and concessions through the very acts of vengeance that had initially terrified his enemies. This combination of calculated violence, strategic diplomacy, and long-term planning is a hallmark of sophisticated medieval revenge, demonstrating that it was not merely reactive but an instrument of power and legacy. Through Rollo, we also see the connection between revenge and the establishment of dynastic power. His descendants would become rulers of Normandy and eventually play pivotal roles in European history, including the Norman conquest of England. The foundations of this dynasty were laid not only through martial skill and political acumen, but through acts of calculated vengeance that asserted authority, deterred rivals, and established a legacy of respect and fear. Revenge, in this sense, was both personal and historical, shaping the trajectory of entire regions and generations. Ultimately, the story of Rollo and the Siege of Paris demonstrates the complexity, sophistication, and enduring significance of medieval revenge. It was a multidimensional phenomenon encompassing personal grievance, strategic calculation, psychological insight, and political foresight. Revenge was immediate and long-term, brutal and calculated, physical and symbolic. Rollo's mastery of these dimensions allowed him to achieve his personal objectives, secure the loyalty of followers, intimidate rivals, and lay the groundwork for a lasting legacy. Rollo's life reminds us that in the Viking world, as in much of medieval Europe, revenge was inseparable from leadership, authority, and survival. It required intelligence, patience, courage, and a deep understanding of human behavior and social dynamics. When executed skillfully, it could restore honor, consolidate power, deter opposition, and create opportunities for lasting influence. The Siege of Paris and Rollo's broader campaigns stand as enduring examples of how revenge, far from being a mere emotional response, could serve as a sophisticated tool of strategy, morality, and political calculation. Through the lens of Rollo's life, we gain insight into the cultural, psychological, and strategic dimensions of medieval revenge. It was deeply personal yet inherently social, immediate yet long-term, brutal yet calculated. Acts of vengeance communicated power, restored honor, enforced norms, and shaped the course of history. Rollo's legacy, preserved in chronicles and sagas, exemplifies the enduring impact of such calculated retribution, illustrating how one individual's determination to avenge slights, assert dominance, and seize opportunity could alter the destiny of regions, establish dynasties, and leave a mark on history that resonates for centuries.